This is the BBC. For details of our complete range of programmes, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.
Welcome to the latest global news recorded at 14 hours GMT on Thursday the 17th of November. I'm Jackie Leonard with a selection of highlights from across BBC World Service news today. Coming up, a new report has called for a rethink of how addiction is treated in the United States.
12.5 million people in the US have problem with prescription drugs, often strong painkillers, for example. 66 million people admitted to binge drinking in the last month in the US.
Also in the podcast, the Syrian military has stepped up its bombardment of rebel-held positions in eastern Aleppo. More than 100 civilians have been killed in the latest offensive. The Japanese Prime Minister will become the first foreign leader to meet the US President-elect Donald Trump later today. And for the first time, researchers have brought together all the surnames in Britain in one very large book. So where, for example, did Farah come from?
Broadly speaking, there's the R type and the H type. The R type comes from a Middle English word for an iron worker, a blacksmith, something like that. But of course the numbers have been pushed up recently by immigrants of a Muslim background who have the name mainly from Arabic farah, which means joy.
But first, drug and alcohol addiction is one of the most pressing health crises of our time. So says the US Surgeon General, who's calling for urgent countermeasures. In the first report of its kind, Vivek Murthy says substance abuse is affecting millions of Americans and costing almost $500 billion each year, but that only 1 person in 10 is receiving treatment. He stresses that there needs to be a complete rethink on how to approach the issue. Substance abuse shouldn't be seen as a character flaw, but as a chronic illness, like cancer or diabetes. Valerie Sanderson spoke to the BBC health reporter Smita Mundasad and asked her more about the US Surgeon General's comments.
He's really clear that the whole culture around the thinking about addiction needs to change. He says it's not a moral failing, it's a treatable disease of the brain, and like other chronic illnesses, say heart disease or diabetes, it needs to be treated with the same care and compassion and attention. He says at the moment, 1 in 10 people are not getting treated, and we wouldn't stand for that if it was cancer or if it was diabetes. And he says things really have to change so that people's thinking changes around this issue and people start getting the treatment that they need.
And we're not just talking about illegal drugs, are we? We're talking about the whole gamut. We're talking about painkillers, alcohol. I mean, how big is the problem?
The numbers here are huge. 12.5 million people in the US have problem with prescription drugs, often strong painkillers, for example. 66 million people admitted to binge drinking in the last month in the US. And 78 people a day die from opioid overdoses. So lots of different problems affecting a huge number of people.
And what does the Surgeon General suggest should be done?
His biggest answer is this change in culture, this idea that it is a medical problem with the brain that needs to be treated here. And he says rather than attitudes, science is the answer, that we need to look at the evidence behind what works. He's gone into some specifics. He says, for example, that shock interventions on television do not work and often backfire, that people need to stop doing that kind of thing. He also looks at abstinence and says that doesn't always work. Instead, giving people medication to wean them off drugs might be the right way to go. His overall message is let's use science, let's not use attitudes. And he says this is the biggest moral issue that the United States is facing at the moment.
And I suppose there are parallels, aren't there, with there was a smoking report, or a report on smoking rather, back in 1964. I mean, it's extraordinary how attitudes to smoking have changed in the decades since. Is it that kind of societal change he's talking about?
Lots of people are drawing parallels with that report back in the 1960s, where the Surgeon General then pulled together 7,000 articles that had already been published about the link between smoking and cancer, and put them all in this very startling report saying, look here, smoking is a problem, things need to change. That report is credited as the first step towards what we see now, so many fewer people smoking, so much less lung cancer, and there is much hope now that this report will do the same thing for addiction.
That was the BBC health reporter Smita Mundasad. The Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe today becomes the first foreign leader to meet Donald Trump since he won last week's American presidential election. Mr. Abe said he was looking forward to talking to the president-elect.
I feel honoured to be able to hold a meeting with the US President-elect before anyone else. I would like to talk about our dream and vision for the future with President Trump. The Japan-US alliance is a pivot of Japan's diplomacy and security. The alliance only works based on trust. So I would like to build that trust with President Trump. And based on that, I would like to work together with him towards world peace and prosperity.
During his campaign, Mr. Trump often condemned the major trade deal struck by President Obama with Japan and 10 other Pacific Rim countries. And he caused alarm by suggesting that Japan and South Korea should do more to defend themselves. From New York, our diplomatic correspondent Paul Adams reports.
When Shinzo Abe shows up here at Trump Tower to meet the future leader of the free world, he may well hear the chanting of protesters outside. But he'll also be aware that Donald Trump has made something of a career out of shouting abuse at Japan, among other close American allies. Mr. Abe was the first foreign leader to offer to meet Mr. Trump. It's a little early, perhaps, to talk about a Trump doctrine, but what will this encounter tell us about the president-elect's attitude to Japan, to trade, and America's role in the world? On the day after Mr. Trump's election, Shinzo Abe said he looked forward to working with the next US president. But how easy is that going to be? After all, Donald Trump does seem to have a bit of a bee in his bonnet about Japan.
The Japan bashing has been a feature of Trumpism since the Japanese were worrying people here because they were buying up real estate.
Tom Nagorski, Executive Vice President of the Asia Society.
By the way, this is not unique to Donald Trump. We've had a giant backlash against free trade generally, against globalization. Vis-a-vis Japan, this is a critical issue.
I'm going to withdraw the United States from the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
For Donald Trump, nothing seems to embody the evils of the modern globalized economy more than the huge 12-nation Trans-Pacific Partnership, part of President Obama's so-called pivot to Asia.
The Trans-Pacific Partnership is another disaster, just a continuing rape of our country. That's what it is, too. It's a harsh word. It's a rape of our country.
8 years in the making and representing a third of all global trade, the TPP was finally signed this year. Japan is a member, but under Donald Trump, the United States won't be. Michael Oslin, Director of Japanese Studies at the American Enterprise Institute, says he hopes President Trump won't simply turn his back on free trade.
Mr. Trump himself has talked about the alternatives of bilateral trade agreements. So the fact that the Trans-Pacific Partnership is dead, I don't think means that free trade is dead.
We right now defend Japan. Japan pays us a small fraction of the cost, a very small fraction. I want them to pay us at least the cost, because we don't have...
Donald Trump's other Asian refrain, much in evidence during the campaign, was the idea that America is being ripped off over the cost of keeping 80,000 American troops in Japan and South Korea.
You're talking about billions and billions of dollars, and you're talking about worse than that. If we get attacked, Japan doesn't have to defend us, okay? That's pretty bad.
And he went further, even suggesting that Japan and South Korea should develop their own nuclear weapons.
And frankly, the case could be made that let them protect themselves against North Korea. They'd probably wipe them out pretty quick.
It's talk like this that horrifies America's Asian allies. Young Jung Kwan, South Korea's former foreign minister, is the co-author of a new report on America's role in Asia.
If the U.S. stops security commitment in Northeast Asia, and if alliance stops, then probably South Koreans will think seriously about a nuclear option. And if they do, probably Japanese people consider seriously nuclear option. This kind of proliferation in their region will not be positive. It will destabilize security.
Let's say China.
Donald Trump said many things during the campaign. His obsession with China was frequently parodied on social media. but President-elect Trump will soon be dealing with the complexities of the real world. Michael Oslin, whose new book, The End of the Asian Century, paints a picture of a fractured and unstable region, says it won't be long before the new president faces an Asian challenge.
The North Koreans always challenge the new U.S. president, whether through an overt attack on South Korea of some kind or through nuclear and missile tests. And how he responds will send a very strong message. And if not ready, then that's going to embolden both China and North Korea. And I think you will then see a much more uncertain and unstable Asia than you would otherwise.
That report was by Paul Adams in New York. Well, Valerie Sanderson spoke to our Asia-Pacific editor, Michael Bristow. So an interesting meeting in prospect.
It is. It's an important meeting. Firstly, because of the trade relationship the US has with Japan. America and Donald Trump particularly sees that as an unfair relationship. But the most interesting part will be the security relationship and that kind of discussion. If Donald Trump does what he says he was going to do before he was elected, then it will be nothing short of a revolution in US foreign policy when it comes to East Asia. Essentially, since the Second World War, the United States has underwritten the security of East Asia, primarily by putting tens of thousands of troops in South Korea and Japan. That relationship was strengthened by Barack Obama. He reinforced these relationships. He made a pivot towards Asia. Donald Trump has said he wants to dismantle a lot of that. He wants Japan and South Korea to pay for its own defence. He's even suggested, as we heard there, that perhaps Japan and South Korea could get nuclear weapons. Now, this would completely change the relationship between China and the rest of East Asia. Japan, South Korea would have to spend so much more money. Really change the actual nature of how trade is done in East Asia.
Well, what's the financial gap? I mean, how much does Japan pay at the moment?
We heard there Donald Trump saying Japan spends a fraction. It's a little bit more than that. It's complicated, the figures, but essentially each year the US spends about $5 billion on bases and personnel in Japan. Japan pays about $4 billion on various other things. So quite an equal relationship in that respect. Japan, of course, would have to spend more if it didn't rely on all these US warplanes and ships to defend itself. And of course, the balance of power would change as well in East Asia if the US withdrew slightly, which is something China has been trying to get the United States to do for many, many years.
That was Michael Bristow. Barack Obama is in Germany as part of his last foreign trip as president. There's some concern in the country about Mr. Obama's successor. Our Berlin correspondent Jenny Hill has been to the western town of Bamberg to find out why many people there are unsettled by the election of Donald Trump.
Bamberg's cheerleaders are a fearless lot. In a chilly gym, they form a precarious human pyramid. Then a girl's flung towards the ceiling turns a perfect somersault under the dazzling strip lights. This town, once dominated by a US Army base, still celebrates its American links. But few here are cheering now.
Wir kennen jetzt die Politik dort nicht so gut.
We don't know much about American politics. But when I hear that he wants to build a wall at the Mexican border and what he thinks about women and black people, I think it could be difficult in the future.
Also ich bin sehr gespannt, was da auf die ganzen Frauen in Amerika zukommt.
I'm very interested to see what's in store for America's women. If you listen to all the comments he made during the campaign, they were very sexist. I don't understand how women can go and vote for such a man.
Germany will be sad to see Barack Obama go. Air Force One touched down in Berlin last night, just in time for dinner with the woman he calls his closest international ally. Donald Trump's victory was greeted with widespread and undisguised horror here in Germany. One minister described it as a nightmare from which we can't wake up. But shock is turning to pragmatism as Berlin seeks to establish ties with the new administration. Their concern now, they don't know what Donald Trump really thinks about foreign policy. Neither do they know where he stands on Germany and Europe. And they can only guess at what he'll mean for defence the environment, or Angela Merkel's influential position as interlocutor between Russia and the West. The transatlantic relationship matters, not least because America is Germany's biggest trading partner. As Bamberg's cobbled streets darken, copper saucepans glisten in a bright shop window. Inside, Peter Ebel rearranges his spaghetti strainers and pepper grinders.
Time will tell. The election campaign isn't real politics. Trump is the president-elect of the US. I'm sure he'll want to be a good president, so we have to be optimistic and wait for him to change.
Mr. Trump's victory is likely to influence Germany's own shifting domestic politics, perhaps fuel support for the populist party AfD.
It's the responsibility of mainstream politics to make sure we don't fall back into this dangerous time.
Andreas Starker is the mayor of Bamberg.
Thankfully, there is no charismatic figure with such momentum and such an election campaign anywhere in Germany. Nevertheless, I fear that AfD is going to become a permanent force to reckon with. They offer simple formulas and pretend to have the answers to complex problems, but they don't.
Like most Germans, Bamberg's lucky bears don't trust Donald Trump, and in a country that values stability, everything is up in the air.
That report was by Jenny Hill in Germany. You're listening to Global News, the best stories, interviews and on-the-spot reporting from the BBC World Service. Remember that every weekend you can hear a review of the week's main news stories and why they matter. That's in the world this week. It's broadcast on Saturdays and Sundays, and it's available to download from our website. Reports from the Syrian city of Aleppo say government forces have significantly intensified their assault on rebel-held neighbourhoods. It's the third day of the offensive. Thomas Morgan reports.
The Syrian military is continuing its air and artillery campaign against rebel-held positions in Aleppo. Dozens of barrel bombs and airstrikes have been reported, and witnesses say there's also been an increase in artillery fire. Possible evidence of a further escalation came in video footage taken outside the city that shows a Russian-caliber cruise missile heading towards Aleppo. Moscow had previously said it was not targeting the city. On Wednesday, civilian volunteers from the White Helmet said close to 100 people had died in the current campaign against Aleppo and its surrounding towns and villages.
Thomas Morgan. Iraqi special forces have been slowed down in their push into the northern city of Mosul by bad weather and by deadly attacks by the fighters of the group that calls itself Islamic State, including a suicide car bomb. In the city's eastern Tahrir neighbourhood on Wednesday, a car packed with explosives sped out from its hiding spot in a school complex, ramming into an Iraqi troops position and exploding into a ball of fire. One soldier was killed and 3 were wounded. Government forces sometimes advance less than 100 metres a day. They're learning more about IS, its foreign fighters and its international network. Our Middle East correspondent Quentin Somerville joined a patrol of special forces as they searched captured territory for Islamic State militants.
It is now 8 a.m. We are heading out with Major Salam, 4 Humvees, to a neighbourhood they have already cleared. They did so yesterday, and they're going to be moving house to house on foot in that neighbourhood, making sure it's only civilians in the area, looking for ISIS fighters, further securing that neighbourhood. Special forces are just bringing in the considerable might of their armoured bulldozer to clear the end of the street. Major, the bulldozer seems like one of your most important pieces of equipment.
Yeah, the bulldozer is very important. The bulldozer stops any car bomb they can attack us. So what we try to do right now is open the area after we closed it yesterday in the operation. And right now we try to open all the areas so the civilian can be moving so easy way in this neighborhood.
The street's full of people. They've all come out into the sunshine to see the soldiers, but we've been told to stay close to the vehicles because it hasn't been cleared. And in fact, the commander just came out of one house holding an Islamic State flag. The men around here still have their beards, and when we ask them why, they tell us they're worried that the Islamic State will come back, and if they do, they'll be in trouble. IS flag at the end of the street. Just heading into a house. Broken glass, the door's been forced open. That's a bomb?
Yeah, that's a bomb.
We found 2 improvised explosive devices, 2 bombs. Lots of body armour. The fighters, though, have gone.
Did the Islamic State order by English?
Yeah.
They order for drones now.
Yeah. It seems the Islamic State only just left this drone factory a couple of days ago. They were taking shop-bought drones, modifying them and turning them into weapons. This product is not a toy, it warns. A man living nearby tells me there were foreign fighters, lots of them, from Russia, Tunisia, Syria and China. They've treated us badly, he says. Foreign fighters stood out here. Under the Islamic State, Mosul was cut off from the world. But we're learning now that more than anything else, the Islamic State were preoccupied with one thing: preparing for this war. And they did that methodically and systematically. There's a pause in the advance by special forces in eastern Mosul, so they're making intelligence gathering a priority. It's more valuable than finding IS weapons, says Major Salam al-Abaidi.
It is easy for us when we save these people, the civilian people, and we talk to them. They just give you the information about where the ISIS fighter located. The civilian know much better than we know about, because they live with them like 2 years here.
And it sounds like there've been foreigners here, yeah? Foreign fighters?
Yes, it looks like foreign fighters, and they say that we see the fighters here, they use the drone from this house against our forces. The civilians say that. We're looking for any information that can lead for the names or the location or these local fighters or different fighters.
One ledger full of names. This seems to list names of IS fighters. They seem to be passport documents or ID documents.
This is important, the information, because we fight against international terrorism, and we share this information with our other units and also with other countries.
We're gonna kick in the door. Special forces are at the house opposite where they found the IS flag. They fired a few shotgun rounds into the door. They've been very cautious. One of the soldiers has just told us to stay inside. This neighbourhood is you can hear the explosions. There's fighting nearby, but there's a bit of tension here.
There is a sniper with heavy rifle. See that vehicle?
Run.
One by one, stop there until your vehicle.
At the end of the street, he's fired off 3 shots, so very carefully the men are leaving this building one by one and getting into the vehicles as quickly as possible. Let's go. As we're crossing the road, one of the men, Hussein, a gunner, is hit. Quickly they patch him up and he's going to make it. All of these fighters know, though, that the battle they're fighting isn't just confined to these streets, it's far bigger than Mosul. The losses they are inflicting and the intelligence they're gathering is already doing deep damage to the Islamic State here and far beyond Iraq.
That was Quentin Somerville in Mosul. The second in line to the British throne, Prince William, has urged governments around the world to act to save vulnerable species like rhinos, elephants, pangolins and lions before it's too late. The Prince is with representatives from 40 countries who are attending a conference on wildlife trafficking in the Vietnamese capital, Hanoi. He described the traffickers' operations as even more sophisticated than 2 years ago.
We know where the animals are that are being killed. We know through which ports, airports and highways their products are being shipped from killing field to marketplace. And we know which markets are fueling the demand for the entire trade.
Monitoring groups have identified an area along the border between Thailand and Laos as central to the smuggling operation. The town of Nakhon Phanom in northeastern Thailand is said to be a key hub for the infamous trafficking trade route to Vietnam and on to China. Our correspondent Jonathan Head, who's there, says the Thai authorities have tried harder to clamp down on the trade compared to neighbouring Laos, where he says it's a free-for-all.
The wildlife trade there is almost completely uncontrolled with a huge amount of official collusion. Here, there have been moves by some parts of the Thai government to try to shut the networks down. The one that operates here in Nakhon Phanom, it's largely ethnic Vietnamese, but they've got allies distributed across the country. Different people come up and then go underground as their target or they're surveyed. They've got links, known links, and these have been surveyed over a number of years now with South African poachers. And they get a lot of supplies, particularly of rhino horn and elephant tusks, through that route. They were up until recently using a cover whereby they kind of had fake hunts that they brought Thais over to hunt. And the hunting, you're allowed to keep the trophy if you hunt it, hunting rhinos and elephants and bringing huge amounts over here, sending them across this river, the River Mekong, into Laos, where they then have a very short journey to reach Vietnam and from there to China. So this is a major trading route. The Thais have moved to shut it down, but this network is still very active. It's very hard to get clear evidence. A lot of people are trying. They've built up lots of circumstantial evidence of their involvement. They're tracing the money as well. There's a lot of tracing of money transfers going on. And yet, even here in Thailand, which is more effective than Laos, the one thing we don't see is arrests. We see seizures of huge amounts of elephant tusks and rhino horns. We've just seen that in Vietnam too, and they're destroying them now rather than keeping them, which means they can't be sold on. But they're not arresting these ringleaders. And these criminal networks are believed to be involved not just in the wildlife trade, but in bigger trades like narcotics as well. So they're very, very well funded. And that is the problem that Prince William has highlighted. He said, you know, we're making progress, but not fast enough. They're making better progress. And he said very bleakly, if you were a betting man, you would have to bet on extinction for many of the animals that we see traded across this border. So this is a plea for help, encouraging governments who are doing more than they've ever done, but telling them it's just nowhere near enough.
That was Jonathan Head in Thailand. The internet has allowed many people to become amateur sleuths, delving into their family names and backgrounds. But a group of researchers from the UK has gone much further. They've just published a book which looks with forensic detail at more than 50,000 British and Irish names. Nick Miles reports.
For 4 years, a team of researchers spent long hours holed up in dark, dusty backrooms. They pored over medieval church registers, tax records and census returns. And that academic legwork is what sets this apart from your average genealogical website. The book describes 4 main categories of names, those based on places, occupations, relationships or nicknames. And it corrects misconceptions as it goes. One of the lessons you can draw from the research is the need to look beyond the modern appearance of a word. Leveson, for example, could be viewed as son of Levi. The researchers found it's no such thing and refers to the Scottish town of Livingston. Longfellow is another anomaly. Comparing early references of names to census records, it seems Long or Longfellow were actually ironic references to how small a person was. The book debunks a few myths too, and that will disappoint Campbell families everywhere. That name was thought to have come from de Campobello, of the beautiful field. This new research tells us it's actually a Gaelic nickname, meaning crooked mouth. A bit of a come down. Over 5,000 names reflect the diverse languages and cultures of immigrants who've settled in the UK and Ireland since the 16th century, including many from India, China and Arabic-speaking nations. Some names like Farah are explained for the first time in the work. Professor Richard Coates is the principal investigator of the book.
Broadly speaking, there's the R type and the H type. The R type comes from a Middle English word for an iron worker, a blacksmith, something like that. And it comes in a range of spellings. But of course, the numbers have been pushed up recently by immigrants of a Muslim background who have the name mainly from Arabic farah, which means joy, happiness, something like that.
The work of the researchers isn't over yet. This book lists all the surnames shared by at least 100 people. They're already working on looking at even rarer names, shared by just a handful of individuals.
That was Nick Miles, which probably means either gracious, a soldier, or a long way to walk, depending on who you talk to. And that's it from us for now, but I'll be back with an updated version of the Global News podcast later. If you'd like to comment on this podcast or the topics covered in it, do please send us an email. The address is globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk. I'm Jackie Leonard from the Old High German for Lionheart. I'll take that. And until next time, goodbye.